What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Young World Leader Summit. For those of you who I don't know, my name's Langley. I'm with the Summit team. And whew, 2020. Been quite the year, right? Especially rough over here in the live event space. But we've pivoted and we've built two new things that we're really excited to tell you about. The first is we built our own nonprofit called Summit Impact, which this weekend is all about. So throughout the year, we'll be building programming around environmental stewardship, criminal justice, the future of work. The list goes on and on, lots of updates coming. And then the second thing is we built our first year-round version of Summit called Summit Junto, where we handpick 7 people within the Summit community to form your personalized leadership board. And then we'll be able to build really intimate, beautiful live events on the other side of this. So if you want to find out any more on any of this, you can head over to our website, www.summit.co. And now, excited to hand it over to our talented MC, Michelle Antoinette, to kick off the weekend.
Women around the world are at the center of rebuilding in times of crisis and conflict. While women reach new heights across the globe, we must continue to elevate their work. We are fortunate to have experts with us today from the United Nations Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund. Kristen Bell is known for her popular roles in blockbuster movies and hit TV. In her latest role as the global advocate of the United Nations Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund, WPHF, she's using her voice to champion the cause of women whose nonprofits are leading local efforts to tackle some of the toughest issues on the planet. Bell will join Nahla Valji, Senior Gender Advisor to the United Nations Secretary General, and Htar Htar, a civil society leader from Myanmar whose work is supported by WPHF. Together, they'll discuss the global imperative to support more women leaders and their work to build peace and respond to crises worldwide. So please welcome Kristen Bell, Nahla Valji, and Htar Htar.
We are the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund, a first-of-its-kind global partnership of the United Nations, governments, civil society organizations, and people just like you, working together to empower women around the world to be a force for lasting peace. Women facing conflict are leading efforts to mediate disputes, provide humanitarian response, and negotiate peace in their communities. Despite this, support for women's participation in peace-building and humanitarian action is dramatically underfunded worldwide. WPHF is mobilizing support from across the globe to fund local women's organizations working on the front lines of conflict and crisis. We are calling on the world to invest in women's untapped potential, and we need you with us. Find out how you can support the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund today at wphfund.org. Together, we can mobilize support for women who are changing the world.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our discussion today, which is called An Inclusive Recovery, Women Rebuilding from Crises, Conflict, and COVID-19. I am Kristen Bell. I am the proud global advocate for the United Nations Women, Peace, and Humanitarian Fund, and I want to thank you, Michelle, and our organizers at Summit for the very warm introduction. I'm really excited to be here today. Today, we are going to discuss a pretty urgent need for the world to step up and support more local women leaders who are rebuilding their communities back from conflict, crises, and the added bonus of COVID-19. I'm especially thrilled to share with you today the work of the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund and what it's meant to me over the years, having a front row seat to these remarkable women who are actually leading local change and doing it pretty well on the front lines has been inspiring and empowering, and it has taught me so much. The Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund supports could not be more deserving. They respond to the urgent needs of their communities by mediating conflict, protecting human rights, responding to humanitarian crises, and creating peace that is built to last, which I think is a really important and special component of this organization. I'm proud to be a part of this global movement, and I am privileged to share with you more about their work today. With that, I want to introduce two astounding women who are joining the discussion today, who I'm very excited to talk to. First, we want to welcome Nahla Valji. Nahla leads the work on gender equality for the highest office in the UN. Nahla, we're excited to learn from you and your wealth of knowledge and experience and global perspective, and I'm really happy you could join us today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
We're also honored to be joined by Tata, a woman leader and WPHF partner from the Akaya. Am I pronouncing that correctly, Tata? Wonderful. Organization in Myanmar. Ta's work is just one powerful example of the type of women-led projects that the WPHF supports in countries facing conflict and crises across the globe. Ta, we are so honored to have you join us today, especially at such a late hour. I know it's really late there. What time is it?
It's midnight.
Woo, girl. I hope you got some coffee in you, because we're going to be talking about important, exciting stuff. And we're really excited to listen and learn from your perspective as well. I think that's how we do our best work, is learning from the people who are doing it. So thank you so much to both of you for being here.
Very honored to be here too.
I'd like to start off with some questions, if that's okay for you guys. My first question that I have goes to Nahla. It's actually a two-parter. From where you sit at the highest office in the United Nations, I know you must deal with many, many urgent issues facing our planet, from climate change to human rights violations, humanitarian urgencies, conflict, and now COVID-19, which all, I would guess, split your focus because they're all really important. So I have to ask, why are women so crucial to all these issues?
Great. Thanks so much for that, Kristen, and thank you for the organizers for the invitation to be here with all of you today. And Kristen, thank you to you for your work as a global advocate for the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund. It is, as you said, such a crucial initiative, and your work in amplifying the voices of women who respond to crises and build peace is really critical. And it's a pleasure to be here with you, Tata. It's women like you, it's organizations like yours that are on the front lines that really are making a difference. And again, the reason why the WPHF and the support it provides is so incredibly important. You know, Kristen, as you said, we're facing multiple juggling crises at the moment. Humanitarian crises, threats to peace are perhaps more common than they've ever been before. Globally, the number of displaced people is at the highest that it's been since World War II. And now, on top of all of this and you know, rising violent extremism, climate change, we're now dealing with the deadliest pandemic in a generation. But to bring it back to your question, why are women and their involvement so critical to all of these issues? Well, the first reason is, let's start with numbers. Women are half our global population. That means that women and girls constitute half of the population of 2 billion people who are living in conflict-affected countries at the moment. They constitute half of the more than 80 million persons who are displaced due to insecurity, climate change, violent extremism. And women have a basic human right to be part of the decisions, equally part of the decision making that is taking place and deciding the decisions that shape their lives, their communities, and their country's future. And this is tied to the second point, which is impact. Women experience conflict and insecurity differently. And part of this is because of the pre-existing inequalities. So in many countries, women cannot pass on their citizenship to their children. When they are displaced, it can render their children stateless. In some countries, they might not be able to inherit land, which means that when their spouse is killed during conflict, they might see their land, their means of survival for their family, passed on to a distant male relative, and they and their families are destitute. We know that women experience, in particular, sexual violence during conflict. They can be killed, they can be injured, and all of this is underpinned by pre-existing inequalities. And so the impact of conflict is different for women, and their voices have to be at the decision-making table when we're talking about how to build peace as a result of that. But perhaps the most important reason we need women in decision-making is because the story of women in conflict is not just one of vulnerability or victimhood. Women are more than mere passive victims in fragile settings. In fact, on the contrary, women in crises are powerful vehicles of resilience, of agency, of leadership and action. Around the world, women are playing critical roles as first responders and peace builders in conflict and crisis settings. In a number of countries, and just to give you a few examples, in a number of countries, women have set up during election times in Africa what they call situation rooms. So they're monitoring in communities where there might be ongoing tensions or upcoming violence. And we know that elections are often a trigger point for conflict. And women are on the ground preventing and doing early warning and conflict and risk mitigation. In Yemen, Syria, Mali, and a range of contexts, women are crossing conflict lines to provide aid in some of the hardest to reach places. They're often the first in their communities to be mobilizing for peace, working to build a more secure and better future for all. And women's active engagement, their participation and leadership is key to building more lasting and inclusive peace. We know that where women are peacekeepers, we get better access to communities to protect them. We get better access to information to protect them. Where women are humanitarian, are on the front lines of humanitarian aid, our assistance goes further, has greater impact. When women are at the peace table, that peace that we secure is more sustainable in the long run. And yet, despite all of this, women continue to be marginalized and discriminated. They are not at the peace table. They are not in equal numbers in decision-making in peace and security. Some of this is simply about bias and discrimination. It is the structures of our world that men are in leadership positions and women are often invisible. But when it comes to peace and security, this is a self-reinforcing cycle as well. So if we look at the peace table, it's often the men with guns that we put at the table to negotiate with, rather than those who are actually the ones building peace in communities. And so this requires a disrupting of our way of thinking. And I think that is fundamentally where we see the role of women peace builders and their importance is that they do disrupt. They disrupt our ways of thinking, our ways of creating the world around us, so that we can better lay the foundations for a sustainable peace.
That is amazing. And I know from my experience, I only have one test group and it is my family, but I certainly know that when I am mediating amongst us, things tend to go a little bit better usually, and there's nothing death-defying happening in my household. But I can use that as an example. And also I've learned from my own children, when I'm using force, which is the reference you chose to, use when there's a man with a gun at the table, it doesn't go as well. And I'll tell you something, it doesn't last. And that's the goal, right? To get these things to last. We don't want to be doing this work our whole lives. We want to set up systems that work, put the power back in the hands of local community members, and just make sure that it's a well-oiled ship and be of assistance. I wanted to ask you sort of a follow-up, and you touched on it a bit, but I know that the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund is currently channeling much needed financing to local women's organizations that are just facing the most urgent crises. From your perspective, can you talk a little bit about what makes local women's organizations, their work, their voices, their inclusion, the sort of most important key to the most urgent issues facing our planet today, and why WPHF is in the best position to help with this?
Yeah. So local women's organizations like TAS in Myanmar are playing a critical role in building peace and responding to crises. They're often working in some of the most challenging contexts where others find it difficult to reach. They're working in difficult security contexts, and they're working with limited financial assistance. And I think that answers the second question about the importance of the WPHF and of channeling funding to these organizations. They can have more access, they evaluate the needs differently, they know the communities and are well placed to respond to those needs of the communities. They're often the glue of communities, to put it simply. And we can look at the current COVID context and we really see that playing out. In many conflict-affected countries at the moment, we have seen that it's women peace builders who have been the most effective in spreading the public health messaging that we have. So the social distancing, the masks, the testing where available, the basic messages that are preventing the spread of COVID-19. And they are able to convey those messages and have them believed, be credible, and instituted by community members. And this is important. And the reason for it is that we find that where we have low trust environments, and this is particularly the case for conflict-affected countries. You have trust that is broken down between communities and their leaders, between communities amongst themselves. And where that happens, it's difficult for us to spread public health messaging. But women's organizations have been particularly critical in this, because in these conflict-affected contexts, they are the glue, they are trusted, they have the credibility of communities and can broker these relationships that we need. So the approach and programs of local women's organizations are also comprehensive. They don't just serve their communities by implementing specific projects, but I think as the COVID case shows us, they really serve their communities by bringing deep structural change to address the underlying causes of conflict and inequalities that are on the ground. And the reason for this is peace, gender equality, and human rights are often at the core of their mission, and they're interlinked. I gave you a few examples already of the role that women's organizations are playing, but I think, in DRC, for example, we see local women's organizations providing safe spaces for women survivors of sexual violence, organizing community dialogues to raise awareness on women's rights and bring communities together. In Colombia and Liberia, women are actively engaging in the implementation of their peace processes to ensure that there isn't a relapse to conflict. And these are just a few ways the efforts of local women's organizations contribute to building sustainable peace that benefits everybody. And yet today, the work of women's organizations is consistently underfunded and often goes under-recognized. Of the total bilateral aid targeting fragile countries, so the aid and assistance that we provide to conflict-affected and fragile countries, 0.2% is channeled to women's organizations, even though they do such incredibly vital work in these communities and on the ground. Not only is this financial support scarce, but it has actually decreased over time. And yet when we contrast this to our global military spend, $1.9 trillion was spent just last year alone on military and militarization. And this has been following the largest annual increase in a decade. In a quarter century when defense spending has doubled, we're really struggling to find the funding that we need for social infrastructure. And we really see those needs, particularly right now in the midst of this pandemic. And again, this is why the work of the WPHF is just so critically important. They are channeling urgently needed funds to local women's organizations that are really on the front lines of crisis. So far, WPHF has supported 200 women-led organizations and women's rights organizations in 25 countries and has mobilized $50 million US. And I promise you that money goes much further when it's invested in women's organizations. And yet it is a drop in the bucket compared to what it is that's needed. And so hopefully dialogues like today can bring really the credibility, awareness, visibility that is needed for WPHF and the partners that it supports.
This is such an interesting concept to understand, and was one of the first things I grasped working with this organization specifically, was understanding that women are really underrepresented to a degree that is hard to articulate around the world, yet possess this secret superpower that we haven't tapped into. So I hesitate to say they are a secret weapon. They're more like the secret solution. And it's hiding among us. And, with the defense spending that you mentioned and the sort of lack of support for local female leaders, it's just almost like our math is wrong. Our calculator's broken globally, right? Like, we have the solution now, and it is our job to say, like, oh no, we actually figured out we were using a broken calculator. We need to take a little bit of that money that's going into defense. If we disperse it here, the exponential value will shock us. And that's why I love talking about this stuff. I love learning more, because that was the first concept that I really grasped about why women were so important. Because this is not a group that's trying to keep the men out at all. This is a group that just has a calculator that works, and we're like, oh, we just kind of found the secret solution. Let's amplify these voices, get them the funding they need, and sit back and watch the results, to be honest, Thank you so much for sharing all of that. It's so critical to us, I think, to know that we're doing it right and not just throwing money or time and effort at something that's not going to work, but around every corner getting intelligence from you and experience and perspective, we realize that this really is the way to make the math work, to make Earth a little bit more peaceful than it's been.
That's a great way to put it.
I want to bring you into the discussion here because I'm really excited to hear from you. It is so incredible to me that you founded your own women's organization, especially at such a young age. How old were you when you founded it?
34, 35.
Yeah, to have that kind of wisdom is pretty incredible.
In Myanmar, 34, 35 is still regarded as youth.
Yeah, well, I'd like to say in America it is too. Although at my 40th birthday this year, I asked my children how old they thought I was turning, and my 5-year-old said 56, and I said incorrect. Then I asked my 7-year-old, who's supposed to be smarter, and she said 82. So what I wanted to ask you was, I guess I want to know about the challenges that your community faces and how does your organization tackle it, and how basically is the project supported by WPHF, and how do we help you address those challenges? But I guess I should actually begin I would love to hear about you and your background. Sorry, I have a lot of questions I want to throw at you. Can you tell us a little bit more about you and your background first, and what got you interested in this important work?
It is very grateful to be here representing one of the local women's organizations in Myanmar. And in my country, to start with the beliefs and women's body. In my country, it is believed that in our communities, that the woman body is dirty because of menstruation. Menstrual blood is dirty, rotten, and untouchable. So women are treated as inferior to men, and every second in our daily life. And when I was 35 years old, I discovered the link between gender issue and sexuality and empowerment in specific to Myanmar context. And I was so empowered to know that my body is not dirty and I am not the second status. That was a turning point for me from shy, from introvert to submissive, into who am I today. I started to share this information and check whether I'm the only one who empowered with this information. And there are so many women empowered and feel free from these social norms by understanding the truth about our menstrual blood. And this gain energy, this is energy for me, and to see themselves found themselves as a woman. Once we know the truth about our menstruation, and we feel free from all the norms and beliefs in ourselves and become the driver of the family change in the family, I think, which is very important, and in the community, then into the national level. These women in 2012, these women who feel empowered and started to know that they are not a second status, they started the first women action campaign in Myanmar called Whistle for Help, to stop sexual harassment on the buses. We were not leaders, we were not activists, we were just a normal, ordinary woman. But when we know the truth, we broke the silence, and we became more than a normal leaders. We started raising sensitive issues and took risks. The law back then was that you cannot gather more than 5 people, you will be arrested. But we took risks. The campaign was groundbreaking action for women suffering. After the campaign, we have so many things to be doing. So I started to establish the organization called Akaya Women. Through this organization, Akaya Women, we carry out several empowerment initiatives for the first time in the country. For example, the first ever Women's Silversmith workshop. We were the first organization talking about sexuality through transformative gender dialogue. The first local organization who created our own model, our own curriculum addressing gender-based violence through sexuality dialogue, providing services and resources through, although we were limited in financial, but with heart, we became the only organization who provide comprehensive services for women and girls who are sexually abused and other gender-based violence.
Wow, that is incredible. And that's, I mean, again, my only test group is the tribe inside my household where I have my little girls. And it is so, I mean, I deal with absolutely nothing of what you described, and somehow still the global representation of women's menstruation, and even the fact that we call it hygiene as if it were dirty, is something that is seeped into my psyche to make sure that I'm maintaining, celebrating womanhood when my girls grow up. And also a polite reminder to my brain every day that this menstruation every month is because I have a superpower. I can make another person. Like that is a superpower. Again, it sort of floors me that throughout history, it's been put into the shed with this bad light where it's like, wait a minute, no, this is you can make another person. There's no one else who can do that other than women. It's pretty astounding. The WPHF helps you to address these challenges and supports you, correct?
Yes. Yes. You want to, these messages about menstrual blood is dirty, all this, you cannot wash your clothes together with men's clothes, you cannot hang, you have to be a separate lines, even nowadays, regardless of whether you are educated or not educated, we are practicing this norms, and this is you are giving messages to girls and women at home that you are second tier, you are very low. So this, especially with this COVID-19, has added more pre-existing gender inequality on women, especially in these conflict-affected areas. At the start of the COVID in Myanmar in April and May, domestic violence cases reported to our organization goes up to 4 times, more than 4 times on previous year. So with these social and cultural norms that I was mentioned, which position women in a very inferior position. Almost this is every second of your daily life. We can imagine what this means for women and girls in this country. And at home and in the communities, they are marginalized and their violence against women is high, even more in this COVID-19. People at the national level, we see that women are not at the negotiation table. Although it says in the document, signed document, it is 30% should be in the peace negotiation. Women should be 30% taking the seats in the document, but this is just on the paper.
That's
not yet implemented. Not yet implemented yet. Women are not in the negotiation tables, and rape is still used as a weapon of war, and still don't. In Myanmar, we don't have women protection law. The word domestic violence is not in our community even till last 4 or 5 years ago. The the word domestic violence is not in our current law. So it is very strange concept. Only starting from 4 or 5 years ago with awareness raising and things like that, the concept is coming to the community. And women who are raped are forced to marry their rapists for the dignity of the family and dignity for the girls. This is happening in some of the areas of Myanmar still
I vote
now.
no on that one. I vote no on that one. No, that you should not have to marry your rapist. That should.
That's
but
true.
it sounds like you are incredibly pivotal because even though it says in your laws that there should be 30% representation, there isn't. It sounds like it might not even be the highest priority to get the words domestic violence on the books. It might be a higher priority to create a mental awareness campaign like you're doing. And again, we got to look at what creates the most change, right? So it's almost like your work is going to be more pivotal in changing people's lives than just putting a law into effect that may never be executed. I want to ask you really quickly about COVID-19. It's obviously adding another challenge to an already fragile situation. From your perspective, why do you think that local women's organizations like yours are sort of best placed to respond to COVID-19 and its impacts on your community?
I think this is a very good question. And even for us, we are in the city, the former capital city of Yangon. And we are providing services to across country. But once the COVID is here, we cannot move. So we were so lucky that we decided to work with other small local organizations and individual in different across countries. So by the COVID hit our country, we are ready. They are ready. So they are like you said, glue at their community, and they know how to respond. They know the networks. We provide some technical assistance and some funds through this WPHF. So that they can carry on supporting community needs. Not only them supporting services, providing services, but also they are the one who can mobilize their community to involve in this response services and protection services. For example, neighborhood watch campaign and things like that. So they are crucial we are crucial. Local women organizations are really playing a crucial role in this COVID-19.
So it sounds like you guys had been practicing mobilization for years within your organization, and it was sort of the reason that you're so pivotal is because you were prepped and ready, whereas larger organizations and or governments, they were scrambling because COVID-19 threw a real wrench in planet Earth. But you guys had been practicing the actual execution of bringing, campaigns about washing your hands or campaigns about getting tested. You had already been bringing those to light and garnered the respect of your community. So it stands to reason that you should be the ones to implement the help with COVID-19 because you were prepped and ready to go. That's awesome. Yet another secret solution. Nahla, I want to bring this back to you for a second. I want to transition a little bit into a more in-depth look at COVID-19. I know this is a subject we're all fatigued with, but it's really important that we keep talking about it until it's over, until we fix it. We are aware of how devastating the pandemic has been to our own countries and our communities. It's at the front of our minds, obviously. But Nahla, I'd love if you could tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing on the global level from your chair and how the pandemic is affecting women at local nonprofits around the world and their challenges. And is COVID just logistically making it harder for them to get financial support for their work?
Yeah, absolutely. So, crises exacerbate existing inequalities, and I think we heard that from what Todd was telling us. And COVID is a perfect example of this. When this virus really hit us towards the beginning of the year, it's women in the informal sector who have the least amounts of protection. They have no leave days, they have no sick days, their savings are minimal. And it's the informal sector that's being hit the worst. There's hundreds of millions of women in the informal sector around the world. And in the first month of lockdowns, they saw their salaries decreased by 60%. We're seeing everywhere, even in developed countries, we're referring to this as a she-cession. It's women who are being the worst affected economically. It's them who are the first out the door with regards to unemployment, will likely be the last back in the door. We virtually risk setting ourselves back a generation in terms of women's labor force participation. And that's both about the unemployment and it's about the absolute skyrocketing that we have seen of women's unpaid care work within the context of this crisis. And then you add to all of that, the levels of violence against women and girls has escalated at an alarming pace. There's already an estimation that women and girls globally, 18% of women globally have likely experienced violence at the hands of an intimate partner or family member in the last year. That was prior to COVID. We are seeing that rate increase. And we just heard this from Ta in the context of Myanmar, what that looks like. Women living with violence and insecurity in their daily lives. And there is a concrete linkage between women's experiences at the individual level of violence and insecurity and what we talk about on the international stage of international peace and security. Because really, if we're not increasing individual peace and security for half the world's population, what is it that we're actually investing trillions in? And I try to be really careful because I've heard a lot of people talking about, because of the pandemic, the rates of gender-based violence are increasing. And I think we need to be really careful about that. And I thought what Ta said about the bus was just so powerful that, there's an assumption that men's sexuality is something that they can't control. And so women need to just absorb, accept, be passive. And, when we talk about gender-based violence increasing because of the pandemic, it's not a virus that's slapping women around. There is a chain of actions that happen between the impact of the virus on our social and economic systems and how individuals choose to act that out. And so I think we have to be really careful about that because there is a toxic masculinity within that sees violence as a solution. And I think that, that is what local women's organizations are doing. They are making that connection that violence is violence wherever it happens. And the Secretary General of the UN in March issued a global appeal for a ceasefire across the world in all conflicts. And a week later, he came back and he said, we need an end to violence everywhere, from war zones to people's homes, because violence is violence. And we need solidarity in response to this virus. And so, again, that is the reason why women's organizations, it's not just about the work that they do, it's about the way in which they get us to shift our thinking and question our worldviews. But coming back to your question, the funding that is actually going to them, the tracking that we've been doing of funding from the COVID response plans, less than 0.1% of our COVID response and recovery plans funding is going to women's organizations like TOS. Less than 0.1%. So this is the reason why the WPHF launched earlier this year a COVID emergency response window, and it's intended to channel resources directly to women's organizations. Because a survey that they did earlier this year, 30% of women's organizations were saying that they feared that they were actually going to have to shut as a result of resources drying up, as resources are being shifted to the COVID-19 response rather than to these organizations who are on the front line of the response. Through this new funding mechanism, the WPHF has already channeled financing to 43 local organizations in 18 countries worldwide. But again, this is a drop in the bucket with regards to what is needed, to what's needed. The immediate funding gap is over $31 million, and that just begins to address the short-term immediate needs of where we need to be in funding these organizations.
Whew, what a beautiful piece of nuance to add to this, that we should be careful with the statements we make about domestic violence going up in COVID, because the reality is it's sort of always there. I mean, we may be in a worse mood because of COVID, and it may be happening more often that you're angry at a female in your life and you choose to lay your hands on her. But the reality is, you're right, it's not a virus that is slapping women around. That is an beautiful and intense piece of nuance to add to this conversation. Thank you for that. I decided, because I'm hearing a lot of things that facts I don't like. I'm just going to do this when I hear a fact I don't like or something I disagree with. So if you're telling me about that, it's a drop in the bucket in women's organizations, 0.01, I'm just going to give you one of these so everybody knows my feelings on that fact. Okay, I want to shift a little bit and take a look at the bigger picture. We have heard about women doing amazing work on the front lines, building peace and responding to crises, and now they're doing this against the backdrop of this, global pandemic. And it seems like the world is at a bit of an inflection point. Nahla, where do we go from here? Like, looking forward, what is it going to take to achieve a more peaceful and gender equal world? And is there a role in this for everyone?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the starting point. Get involved. This is everybody's responsibility, from the micro to the macro. This is a pandemic that's affecting all of us, and what we're seeing locally in terms of inequality is what's playing out globally. Advocate with your government in their response plans to be investing in women's organizations in your country. It doesn't matter where you live. Be advocating for governments in not to be cutting their international aid. This is a moment in time where we are seeing a pulling back and a focus on the national. If there's one thing this pandemic has showed us, we are all linked. And we have to continue to see that solidarity amongst all of us. And so international aid needs to not just continue, it needs to be ramped up. Within that, we need to earmark resources for women's organizations. We need to be advocating that women are in every single decision-making forum. If there's one thing that has become really clear during this pandemic, we have seen the effectiveness of women's leadership. We're even seeing everyone from CNN to Forbes covering how women heads of countries where women head countries, that the prevalence and infection rate is lower. They're better on track for socioeconomic recovery. We've seen the effectiveness of women's leadership, and not just for women and girls, but for everybody. So advocate for your government to target women's organizations locally, to target women's organizations in your overseas development aid. Continue to advocate for a radical shift in the way that we think about these issues, and for there to be gender balance in everything that we do, whether it be in the private sector, in governments and peace processes. We need to shift our thinking around this. As I mentioned, the rise in global military spending, that's another area. That's money that we need to shift how it is that we're thinking about security. And so investment in social infrastructure, in better social protections, and in the incredible work of women's organizations, as we've heard today. And I think each of us has a role that we can play in making our voices heard in these issues.
I'm going to give you 2 thumbs up for that one. I'm going to do this one. I agree. Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's so great to hear your perspective. And also because, what comes from you is this global perspective of, you could work so hard on an issue and you don't know if there's real results. But what I love so much about the WPHF is that we track the results. The results they're practical, they're tactile. We're seeing the results. We're just begging for the attention to say, like, our calculator works. We're getting the numbers that we want. So let us do the math. And so that's why it's so, imperative to me that I sort of stay on the mic in talking about these issues, because we're seeing the results. We're seeing the results, and sometimes you try to solve a problem and you don't see the results and you go, oh, I got to go back to the drawing board. But that's why I love that we are so often talking to local community members. We're giving them the positions of power. That's how it should be done. I should not come into Ta's community and say how I think it should work. She should be the one to do it, and she's going to be the one that gives us the results, and she is. So Ta, I want to bring it back to you for a second. And, we're at a global summit made up of young leaders and innovators from around the world, summit series, which I love so much. And I've gone to for, I guess, 10 years now. But your work as a young woman, you first began in Myanmar. What were the particular challenges that you faced? As a young woman establishing your organization and in leading in your community's response to crises, like what opportunities do you see for the youth building peace and gender equality, specifically for young people? And I know you have such an incredible story working back. I wondered if you could also, if there's anything you would want to say to young leaders.
As an ordinary woman, turn into activists, of course, there are lots of challenges. Started with my own family. And my husband, especially with his peers, pressure him. Look, what is Htar Htar is doing? And all the religious leaders are telling me that Htar Htar, women's rights, is against God's will. So stop it. They're trying to stop me, persuading me to stop what I was doing. But as for me, I'm very clear. Although I am very shy, coming from very shy to this, I'm very clear that what needs to be changed. But however, the path that I'm stepping in is very new in this country, and I don't know what will be the next happen. And physically very tired, especially because this is new concept, talking about gender in informal peace, from peace from the home to national peace building. I have to sell my ideas. Look, this is what is lacking, like the calculator broken. Look, calculator is broken. We are using the broken calculator. So people don't want to listen to me, and this is very tiresome for me. But finally, I am stubborn. I have to be very stubborn and resist all the pressure, and make people understand what is this all about. So once they started to, I was like, taste this. You will like it. If you don't like it, don't use it. So finally, once they listen and understand about it, they open the doors for me and for other organizations. Now we are the approach, the model that we created is accepted by the police department and Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education. So we provide technically to them and many other organizations, local and even sometimes even NGOs. So
it sounds like this stubborn persistence that we're all given with youth is what should be tapped into. It sounds like that's maybe what you tapped into, that sort of like that feeling of a rebellious teenager that knows something and just wants to get it out. Whether you're shy or outgoing, there is a persistence that is heightened in youth. And it sounds like you tapped into that, because you did meet a lot of closed doors, but I think that's such a beautiful message to young people who want to be involved. Like, tap into your stubbornness, your persistence, all those young people feelings that are brooding, and channel them here, because here is where they will be worthy and useful.
That's true. So for young leaders, don't wait for some other people to give you a chance. You can you can start opening of your own door. And when I was thinking about my kids, they are the one who is going to live in the future, not us. So they should be the one who is telling us what to do for their future. And also in our country, in my this world, I also like to advise and encourage older leaders like me to give a space for youth, bring them along to learn from their experience and give them a space, so that we can enjoy the space together. They are not just the leader of future, they are the leader of today. They should be the leader of today. Now I am enjoying benefits beyond my reach because I embrace different local organizations, especially for this COVID situation. I can still work from home, but benefiting, from different across country. So this is my message to.
I love that. The older people should make room for the youth and not just train them, but be open to their new bright ideas. Because again, that you may not know your calculator's broken. Someone may have a better calculator, maybe getting better results with the numbers. And I absolutely love that, because I was thinking as you were talking about my kids as well, and the persistence. Boy, it's staggering how many times they can ask me the same question if I haven't given them an answer that suffices. And that is something that I think is sort of unique to youth, that persistence. So learning how to channel that persistence of, okay, the door is still closed, keep knocking. Nobody's answering, keep knocking. Nobody's answering, keep knocking. Or here, taste this, try it. Like all that persistence. What a lovely way to take what could be a troublesome characteristic and turn it into something that could be great. Thank you so much for that. I want to, first of all, Nahla and Todd, so grateful to be talking with you guys. But right now, I want to show you something. You're obviously familiar with the WPHF and the incredible work that they do. But what everyone who's watching might not know is that the WPHF is launching a new global campaign on International Women's Day. It is called 1,000 Women's Leaders. The WPHF is calling on the world to invest in 1,000 local women leaders and their organizations in 1,000 communities across the globe by the end of 2025. Because they're on the front line of building peace and responding to crises, we need more of their work. So I want to share a short video from the campaign introducing the voice and work of another WPHF-supported woman leader. So we can take a quick look now.
I worked with a woman that wanted to become a mechanical engineer, but society wouldn't let her. And I was part of the team that trained her, that economically empowered her to open her garage. And she was the first mechanical engineer in Jordan that has her own garage, that actually has men go to her, and men asking her for her help. My name is Jude. I come from Jordan, and I build confidence. I just wanted to work with refugees. I was a volunteer at first, and while I was working there, I started to notice that in crisis situations where emergency relief is needed, women are most affected, because they're enforced into gender roles. I would see women that are 14, well, they're not women yet, they're girls, and being auctioned off to marriage because their family just needs the money. In a misogynistic and Arab society, they're viewed as inferior. But women are strong. It's not the easiest thing to be a woman in a misogynistic country. We are raised to believe that we are inferior, that we cannot achieve what we wish to achieve. And this is all due to cultural barriers, due to the huge culture of shame in Arab society, where if you are empowered, it's shameful, and men don't want to be around you. Your goal should be to get married and have children. And having different goals and having a different mindset and having different objectives than that of what society has been imposing on us has been really difficult. And every day a different struggle arises just because you're a woman, and people do not want to promote your agenda because they think you're just promoting some sort of feminism that's going to break society. For projects led by women to have more funds is that women know more of what women need. A female figure is such a strong and inspiring tool that is not used enough and is only seen in a sense where behind every powerful man is a woman. But that's not true, because women are at the forefront of every struggle. They are what make society prosper. They're not behind every man. They're right there, standing right next to you. I am here to tell you that we will keep working. I will do everything I can every single day to make sure that every woman in Jordan and in the Arab world can feel a slight sense of empowerment.
It's always so energizing to hear directly from the women at the forefront of this incredible work. And I loved what Jude said in there. She's right. Women are at the forefront, and they are in a position of power. And, you know, because if we didn't have babies, there wouldn't be any people. That's not a threat. That's just a fact. It's just a fact, guys. I want to ask you guys both one more question, and I'd love to hear from both of you. I don't think it's anyone can deny how hard this work is, and it's often exhausting, especially Htar, like you said, to reach so many closed doors so often. It would be easy to give up if you don't have that persistence of youth anymore, or just say, I'll let someone else take the reins that's younger. What drives each of you to stick with it, to continue to say, I am going to do this work? What keeps you motivated to be building a more peaceful and gender equal world? Htar, why don't you go first? And then Nahla, I'd love to hear from you too.
For every day, I was thinking, this is my energy. A world without violence for my daughter and my son in the future, and as well as women and girls experiencing violence every day currently are my inspiration to work for today and tomorrow. And we are seeing changes. Now we are seeing changes of what we are doing, impact of what we are doing. For example, when I hear a policeman or women from the community said, after this transformative gender dialogue, they said, I will not treat my daughter and my wife as a second status. I will treat them as a valuable. They are started to correct using the new calculator, which is working well. That is really inspiration for me to move on. And yeah, thank you.
Some of the results, yeah. So seeing even the tiniest result of changing one person's mind is keeping you going, because you know the possibilities. That's a very hopeful drive. Nahla, what about you? What keeps you looking at all these staggering numbers that are pretty depressing each day?
An interesting question. I mean, I think if I were to think about why I got into this area of work, I think what drove me early on perhaps was just an incredible sense of injustice. And I think, you know, as young girls growing up, we all experience this. We look around ourselves when we're really young and we see that boys are treated differently. They get different chores. They seem to be groomed for a different destiny. We identify the gender pay gap really early on. We just see that there's two different worlds that seem to exist. And as I got older, my sense of injustice, I think, as I learned more about the world, only got bigger. I learned when I was in my teens that actually both of my grandmothers were married as children. They were married at 13, 14, 15 years old, had their first kids at 15 and 16. And at that point, that sense of injustice was looking at these incredibly powerful, influential, smart women who'd been denied a real education. And it just occurred to me, generations of lost capacity and potential of half of our population, and what that has cost all of us. And so I think that sense of injustice is perhaps what drove me to come into this work. What gets me out of bed every morning doing this work is, I think, exactly as you just said and Ta just said, it's the energy of other women. You listen to their voices, you listen to the work that Ta does, and it's that energy, it is the inspiration, the incredible resilience and leadership of other women. And if we look around us right now, it is young people, but in particular young women, who are at the forefront of demanding climate justice. It's women who are taking to the streets in countries, mobilizing for greater democracy, human rights, equality, sustainable peace, equality, social justice generally, and all of these issues are really interlinked. And as I said earlier, we're also seeing the more visibility to the effectiveness of women's leadership. And so I think that line, "The future is female," it's not just a tagline on a T-shirt. I think it really is, as you've put it, Kristen, it's our solution. It's the new calculator that we need to be using, and it's really it's the solution for addressing the most pressing challenges that we're facing at the moment. And so I think, as Ta said earlier, just saying to people over and over, like, listen, look, try this. It really is the solution that we need.
Oh, I love that. Visibility to the effectiveness. There's nothing that will change someone's mind more than something that is true and effective, and to give visibility to this new calculator where it's like, no, invest in these local women. I know we haven't done it before. It seems strange, but here's why it gets such an exponential result. Mm-hmm. Visibility to the effectiveness. Oh, I love that. That is actually going to keep me going because I'm just here to serve as a sponge, but also a megaphone in hopes of amplifying this message to everyone. I thank you so much, both of you, for being a part of this thoughtful discussion, letting us listen and learn from you today. I'm sort of both in awe and comforted to know that in spite of all the craziness in our world, we have people like you fighting to make it more just and better and peaceful, and add a little bit more quality back into the mix. So thank you so much for your time. Ta, I am so sorry we made you stay up so late. I hope your kids sleep because that's the worst when you got to go to bed late and they wake up early. It's just, it's made for a cranky day. I want to pose a final question to the audience, to anyone who is watching this right now. It's not really a question, it's words of encouragement. I really encourage you to find out more about how you can join all of us in supporting the WPHF and our new campaign, 1000 Women Leaders campaign. You can go to WPHF Fund. No, I'm going to say it correctly. You can go to WPHFund, because it's tricky, .org/1000 Women Leaders. And you can also help and remain educated and see this new calculator at work by following WPH Fund. And yeah, I just ask that you follow them, that you support them, and that you stay engaged, because we are going to see this do a lot of good in the world. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Kristen.
Thank you.
Wow. Just wow. Thank you so much for that session and for highlighting how local women leaders are building their communities back from crises. You emphasized that women's inclusion, especially against the backdrop of a global pandemic, is more critical now than ever to securing peace and security for all. And that is super important for us to hear right now. And for everybody tuned in, please go and join the Hubblelow Tabletops to discuss the prompt posed by the United Nations Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund team. And if you want to get involved with their work, please visit them in the Partners Lounge and learn more about their work. Again, thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for this wonderful conversation. And please go to the Hubblelow Tabletops to discuss the prompt posed by the United Nations Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund team.